Welcome everyone to the webinar on Follow the Money and Transparency Index. This is the very first BridgeGap webinar. We have joint efforts with 𝐀𝐧𝐭𝐢 as well. We invite you to kindly join the BridgeGap, 𝐀𝐧𝐭𝐢, ERCAS, and YouControl in the chase for oligarchs with these very new tools. My name is Marie Willems, Senior Research Associate from the Lisbon Council, Project Manager, and tasked with the coordination of the BridgeGap project. Today, we are very excited to share with you the demonstration of the Follow the Money and the T Index tools. And I will give you a short overview. I was asked to give a very short presentation of the BridgeGap project. So BridgeGap aims to bridging the gaps in evidence regulation impact in anti-corruption policies. So the few key facts about BridgeGap is that we're 15 partners. We're from 12 countries. We received a total funding of 6 million by the European Commission and UKRI. The duration is 48 months. We're almost closing our very first year. Coordination, as said, lies with the Lisbon Council, and the project principal investigator is Professor Alina Mungiu-Pippidi from the Lewis University, also hosting this webinar. The project answered the Horizon Europe call, the very special Horizon Europe call, actually, on new approaches for combating corruption and other due influences in political decision-making. It is special because the last call was already back in FP7. So the BridgeGap mission is to develop a comprehensive understanding of corruption through interdisciplinary research, enhance knowledge and data on political corruption and undue influences, and integrate modern technologies detecting, preventing, combating corruption. This is actually the topic of today's webinar. But as I said, I'm only going to introduce a very short BridgeGap at this point to leave enough room for all our dear speakers to show you the anti-corruption tools. So I invite you kindly to join the anticorruption.eu website to learn more about us. And this is our consortium. It's a very multidisciplinary research project consortium. And you can see all of our partners here, some of them joining our webinar today. And then I would like to pass on the floor to our dear speakers today. Professor Alina Mungiu-Pippidi, Professor Comparative Public Policy at Lewis University, also the project principal investigator, Noé Letourneau, consultant at ERCAS, presenting actually the T Index today. Welcome, Noé. And Mykhailo Koltsov, Head of Learning and Development at YouControl, and presenting the Follow the Money today. So without further ado, I think, Ben, you would like to say a few words about 𝐀𝐧𝐭𝐢 as well. I will stop sharing my screen, and the floor is yours. Thanks everyone for joining.
Marieke, thanks so much. I'll be very brief. I wanted to just say a few words about the Center for International Private Enterprise. We are a co-funder or key funder and a co-producer of the indexes produced by Alina Mungiu-Pippidi's team, including the Corruption Risk Forecast, the Transparency Index, and the Index of Public Integrity. You can see all of these on the corruptionrisk.org website, which we also help co-produce. And the Center for International Private Enterprise, we're a U.S. government-funded, primarily nonprofit organization, and we exist to support democracy, to support development, but we're the only organization in the world that focuses on supporting and strengthening democracy through market-based solutions, through the private sector. And so we look at the vision and the lens of the private sector as we also try to strengthen civil society and government institutions. And we see the Transparency Index as a really important and powerful new tool filled with over 1,000 links to live sources of public data as a really amazing way to advance that vision of a world where businesses, civil society groups, policymakers, international organizations can look at what is happening on the ground in each country, what's the data, what's the transparency that's actually being shared about land cadasters, registers of commerce, current and past budgets, and seeing how that changes over time. And so we're really proud to be here. I'm really excited to have others participating in this, and the BridgeGap project is going to play a huge role in helping strengthen, especially the sustainability of these indexes and of the transparency index in particular. And in a recent call here at SIPE, in a recent event, we had a very prominent professor of, like Alina, looking at governance here in the United States. And he praised the Transparency Index and the other indexes on corruptionrisk.org as a really innovative new way at looking at how governance and corruption risk is changing on the ground, and highlighted it as an example of a new innovative way to track corruption and track transparency. And so without further ado, I'll close and hand things over to Alina. Alina, it's great to be here and excited to hear what you'll share with the new updates to the Transparency Index today.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you very much, Marike, for the kind introduction, and thanks everybody for taking the time to join us today on International Anti-Corruption Day, when there are probably thousands of events organized around the world, and even we are engaged in more than one, but we are proud to be able to put together this one because this is specific for ERCAS and BridgeGap and our work here. Noé, would you share the slides or should I? So not to switch from one to another. Who is more technical? We all have them. I can share them or you can share them. What I mean to say is that just on the project BridgeGap and on the other technicalities and innovations that we are presenting today we are converging more than, in fact, 10 years of work. We have started with the EU-funded Anti-Corp 10 years ago, which was a project also designed by me, but also like BridgeGap, including a variety of universities, of research groups, of each of them having their own research questions. And in between, we had the DigiWist, which led to the creation of OpenTender.eu and Europam.eu, again, very important projects which need sustainability, because all the European public procurement data was for the first time scrapped and put together. All the European public accountability regulation was for the first time quantified and mapped and put together in a system. And in the meanwhile, we had the luck to be supported because all this tremendous work, particularly based in universities, which have as primary goal teaching, even if, of course, we care for research a lot, was supported in between the DG research grants that we won by other generous funders in order to assure sustainability of OpenTender.eu. Open Society Institute helped. In order to help T-Index born, T-Index is really an innovation which came out of reflections from Anti-Corp and DigiWist of something which was really, really missing. And for this, we had the support of National Endowment for Democracy and of SIPE, who are American funders, American public money, as well as EU public money. And this is why everything we do in BridgeGap is entirely public. And all the tools that we work and all the data that we put together while we work and report on it, both in a policy form and both in an academic form, is in the same time shared with the public. We create commons. This is what makes us different from other research projects. Our commons are there for everybody to share. Corruptionrisk.org is a common. Europam.org is a common. Actually, I think there are scholars who published more based on this because they're interested in regulation more than I did or my research team did. And what we're going to show to you today, we have done it for you to use and for other people to use. We're going to use it as well. But, you know, we could have just used it privately. It would have cost us less money. The importance of these tools lays in their actionability. They are tools made to enable governments, civil society, any grieving party, everybody who is abused out of corruption should be able to act using this tool, to become his own investigator, to become his own advocate, and to become the person who makes the redress, who at least starts the redress. And this is how good governance comes about through all this multiplied, enhanced action. And we are trying to create tools to serve as these multipliers. And today we show you two. The T-Index, which is this creation of ERCAS. Now ERCAS is based After 15 years in Berlin at Luis, we just opened this year in Roma. So that's another news that we put forward. You'll find us from now on in Roma. But of course, we have wonderful people who are in Berlin. We have wonderful people who work with us in Kiev. We have wonderful people like Noé who join us today who are based in Paris. And we have always been a network center rather than a one-site center. And then there is Follow the Money, which builds on the work of the wonderful organization YouControl, with whom we started to cooperate 2 years ago in Berlin, and they are part of the BridgeGap project. Let's change and move into the substance. So why did we come and to think of these innovations? Well, the need was for corruption indicators that we can act upon. You all know what corruption perception is, the most spectacularly known indicator on corruption. The issue on with perception indicators, aggregates of everybody's opinions, an attempt to build objectivity out of a number of different subjectivities, is that those indicators are non-specific. In other words, you do not know why a country increased or decreased, even outside the confidence error, in indicators like corruption perception index or control of corruption from the World Bank. So really, there was this poor guy from Moldova who was fired, who was the head of anti-corruption agency, and he was asked, but why did you fire me? I did quite a lot of good things. And he was told, you were fired because the country did not improve in corruption perception index. And the man aptly asked, but how do you know it's me? I mean, several other things happened in the country, and the indicator doesn't have absolutely any indication what it is about, other than people perceive that corruption has changed or has not changed. So we need a step ahead. We need an indicator which shows us exactly, as a scan, where is the intervention? Where should the surgeon come and put the scalpel? And we started with the transparency, because transparency is actually the tool which is universal, the tool which helps everybody, even when governments are not very keen to intervene and to do something. Even, in other words, when there is no political will. So what do we know of research is that transparency is indispensable for good control of corruption. But in the same time, we know that it is not sufficient, that somebody has to act on it, government or civil society. But even with this transparency, which is just necessary, at the moment when we started to design the T index, nobody knew how much it was. I mean, okay, it's necessary to have a certain degree of transparency, but how much? And how much is it in any country? And can we measure it in any way? And the good news is that, yes, now we can. Now we can, because governments have turned digital. And this allows an unprecedented direct observation into the business of government, which was not before allowed. However, putting out too much information can be very confusing. Governments have 10 websites dealing with one thing, and it's possible for someone who is a moderately internet literate person to spend their half a day and not find what somebody really wants. And here is the other need that we identified, is to be able to create an app which takes people directly to what they need, and to what they need in order to defend themselves from corruption. Finally, here we thought that what we could do is to observe everything which is out there, to measure, to analyze by creating new concepts, and of course, further on, to interconnect and allow people to research in more than one database, and therefore open the work for action for a variety of people. And here came the first tool, the T index. The T index, its long name is Digital Government Transparency Index, because what we measure is what it is called transparency for accountability in anti-corruption literature. Basically, it is transparency modeled taking into account the anti-corruption international law, which is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and Sustainable Development Goal 16. They have a list of things which should happen, and we turn this list basically into a practical list of what a government should put out there in order for its citizens to defend themselves from corruption, and businesses similarly. And we have already published the methodology of this. You find here the link to our publication. How does the index work? It is what we call a fulfillment index. In other words, there is a number of tools that the government should have, websites basically. These websites should be filled with information. Information should be there in a certain accessible format and without pay, because otherwise the citizens would not be able to use it, right? And if you have everything that you should have, you get 100. We call this a fulfillment index in social science. The other important novelty about this is that if we wanted to do a lot of countries, and in the end we do 143 countries, definitely reviewing all these countries and all these languages was far too complicated for one center and one university. So although we always had these very large review seminars where we invited all the rest of the world, we also developed a network of civil society organizations, and we also engaged all the governments. We wrote to all 143 governments, and a significant number of them understood the importance of their reputation and engaged back, basically answering, correcting, or attempting to correct, because we always cross-validate and check on them, the information that we were able to put on them. The index that we now update and that you're going to see today, it's the update from 2024. Now, there is not a lot of change from one year to another because digital transparency is expensive. Right? It means servers, it means people to stay there and to catalog this information and archive this information and the rest. And therefore, changes happen, but gradually. So what will you find is that we have a 2021 pilot index on fewer countries, a full edition in 2023 of 143 countries, and a new edition in 2024. But some countries changed, some countries progress, some countries regress, but most countries stayed the same. The other novelty of the T index is that, unlike, for instance, the Doing Business Index of the World Bank, the old version and the new version, which you know very well, that ran into problems because there were some countries which tried to influence the index and apparently succeeded in influencing the index. They're generally the same countries around who have a great interest in tampering with the index, which are China, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan. I don't want to go more into this because I wrote about this at length, right? How do we defend ourselves from this? Well, we defend ourselves by this from the fact that all our information is entirely hyperlinked. So if we say that something exists, you will see in a second that the link takes you directly there. If we appreciate that all the information is there and give a full one, which is our fulfillment ranking, then you can also intervene. You have a feedback there directly next to it, in which we says, no, we have information that they actually hide. For instance, Russia publishes everything except defense expenses. And since their defense-related expenses now are very high, amount to about a third of the budget, you will discover that Russia is amazingly transparent except this part. But you will have to really know Russia in order to understand this. And this is why this index is crowdsourced. We allow at every country and at every place feedback that we will check, but we encourage people to join with us. Finally, the last innovation is a conceptual innovation of this index, which I have long promoted, but it's the first time when I have the opportunity to implement, which introduces a clear difference between de jure and de facto. What countries pledged to put there, what in law says it should be there. For instance, a country in law says it should have a lobby register. But is the lobby register there? Is the lobby register online? Is the lobby register filled in for all the day, for all the times, for everything else? All right, what is the importance of this? The importance of this is that it allows us for the first time to measure the implementation gaps. It also allows scholars, us or others like us, to make for the first time assessments how effective the tools are. Because if a tool exists, if a tool is implemented and corruption still does not change, then it means that this tool is not sufficient. Something else should happen, and this would allow us to research. Thank you, let's move on. Okay, what are the de jure index components? So first I must tell you that we now have the version that we developed with NED and with SciPy, and which is the big version. for 143 countries in the world. And this version, while increasing on the number of countries, was more parsimonious on the number of objectives that we followed, because it's no secret it's difficult to document 143 countries. So here we simply stayed within the UNCAC limits to the websites and to the laws that we considered indispensable for corruption. What you see here are all the conventions that countries should have: the United Nations Conventions Against Corruption, being a member of Open Government Partnership, of Freedom of Information Act, a variety of regional acts which all imply transparency. And when we're going to move to the T-Index Europe, because we're going to do a special T-Index Europe, we are moving to countries which are all democracies, which is a novelty, right? And where regulation is more, because we have European directives which go more in depth. In Europe, the exigencies are higher than for the rest of the world. So we're going to add a bunch of directives here to the de jure, the money laundering directives, the asset recovery directives, a number of them, right? So the de jure, which now has 6 points, will get a little bit bigger. Let's move to the de facto T-index. The de facto T-index is the big novelty because it is based on direct observation. We really look if what countries pledged to disclose is out there and disclosed. And we group this. We are going to see on our new BridgeGap webpage that we have created new concepts like administrative transparency, judicial transparency, political transparency. But the more you aggregate concepts, the more the need becomes to explain them. So here I show you them in their raw nature as we put them on the T-index, which has the advantage that they can be followed by country and see exactly what happens there. So what you see in green is what is complete fulfillment, a 100% fulfillment. What you see in yellow is partial fulfillment, meaning that countries did create the website, but not all the information is there, or it should be there, or it's not searchable, or they ask for money for access, right? And what you see in red is simply what is not there at all. And you see this for 143 countries, which are basically all countries in the world which have the digital capacity of having something like this. So it gives you some idea how the world varies. And we see that, for instance, an official legal repository or the publication of motivations of Supreme Courts have come to be really widespread tools, impressively so. They are the ones in the bottom where the green is higher, right? But on the other hand, you see that there are items like financial disclosures for public officials, publishing public expenditures currently, not only those for last year, but as itemized expenses, as e-invoices allow, what we call public expenditure tracking systems, which would really allow citizens to compare expenses across hospitals, expenses across schools, expenses across city hall, so to become their own judges of value for money, let alone the help that this will give to auditors in countries. And the green there is really, really very small. We have under 5% countries of the world who have been doing that. In other areas like land cadastre, which is absolutely, in other parts in Europe, which is absolute, but even in Europe, in my native country, which is Romania, a lot of corruption is related to land and property and disputes. And as you can see, there's still a long, long way to go to have the necessary transparency. Business registers, where we can see shareholders. Today, we are in the last 2-3 years, it's a lot of effort to ask countries to disclose beneficial ownership due to the money laundering effort. But if you look at this, you will see that even normal ownership is not known in 2/3 of countries of the world. Registers of commerce do not have normal shareholders, not shell companies, but nobody, right? There are only very few countries where you can find, without paying for it, normal information about who shareholders of a company are. So all of these are actionable areas. These are areas where you can look, you can find by country, and you can see what a government should do, before the complicated things, which will take years, like putting someone in jail. Okay, these are things which should be done today, or 10,000 perpetrators will need to be put in jail 5 years later, which of course is very complicated. Let's move on to see a little bit how the country page look like. This is how a country page looks like on the web page, which is corruption, risk, or transparency, as you see there. You see the de jure on the right, and you see that this specific country is not a very good country. They don't even have a Freedom of Information Act, which many people have these days. They're not even members of Open Government Partnership. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, this country is Egypt. I will disclose this because this government and me have had discussions about this for some years now on improvement. And on the left, you see the de facto, the web pages which are directly observable and where you can click yourselves and check what is there. Where you see a circle which is only half full is that it's only partial fulfillment. And then if you download the Excel database, which is behind the website and which you will find together with the methodology of the entire index in the download page, you will see why. Why is this partial fulfillment there? What didn't we find and what do we object to? Sometimes we even publish the comments we received from experts, from reviewers, from civil society. And if you write, we will take care that your name is mentioned and it will appear there. And as you see, some things are hyperlinked, the ones which exist. The ones which are not hyperlinked is because they do not exist. So this allows you in a second to see what is missing in Egypt and what should be like the first step for Egypt to create an infrastructure for preventing corruption. Let's move on. Okay, you got it by now, so I'm not spending time on this, that we code in 3 ways. This is a bit simplistic, but in order to have so many countries, we decided that it is easier and more transparent this way. Full fulfillment is 1, zero fulfillment is 0, and then there is partial fulfillment to which we grant half points. But there is more than one reason why you can have partial fulfillment, which I already announced. Right? It can be that the paywall exists. It can be that the information is incomplete. It can be that the search engine doesn't work, although information seems to be there. And you will find this in the Excel timesheet. Let's move on. And I think we are moving on to my last slide, actually. All right. So if you look at the global state of transparency today, you see here in green, okay, perfect, this one. You see here in green the de jure index, what countries pledged to do, and in red, the de facto index. And you can see that, regions like Europe and North America, which are put here together, of course, they have a very good fulfillment, 95% de jure fulfillment, but still only 74 fulfillment for everything that we consider should be there in order for citizens, for a government to be really transparent. Still, of course, this is the highest of the world compared to the 55 global average and to the 78 for de facto and for the 78 global average for de jure. But 78 global average for de jure is nevertheless good, and this shows the efforts of the international community to push countries to adopt these acts in the past 30 years. Here is the area where you really see the progress which was made. But in the same time with these projects, you also see how implementation gaps increased. Just go to the bottom, to Sub-Saharan Africa, where you see that they're not far below the global average for de jure. They're at 73%. But if you look at how much de facto they do, de facto is half. Less than half. So basically, they promise they're going to do everything, but they do very little. And compared with the MENA region abroad, where we see all the news these days, you see that in MENA, they pledged to do less, and they did rather similarly. Okay, so they were reluctant to do, but they also have a very bad record in doing this. We will publish the slides and we're going to publish this recording, so I'm not going to spend more time on this, especially since my colleague Noé is now going to go into each of these continents to show you who's doing well and who is doing badly, while I move on chat to try to answer some of your questions.
Thank you, Alina. And I'll pass on the next slides, and we'll start with Europe and North America. That is, as you said, the most transparent region, way above the global average. Just to tell you, the global average, taking into account de facto and the Euro indicators, is at 62%. And as you can see, Europe and Northern America, it's at 81%. So it really is above the global average. And as a country of focus, we decided to focus on Greece this year that had notable advancements, especially in terms of expenditures, access to land cadastre, access to business register, and to building permits in the capital city. And as you can see, even in the allocation of the countries within the rankings, some countries are kind of way above others, even within Europe and Northern America. You can see that Estonia, Lithuania, France, and even the United States are at almost 90%, between 90 and 95%, whereas some other countries, such as Hungary, such as Belgium as well, Cyprus and Luxembourg, are way less transparent. Now I'll pass on the next region, that is Europe and Central Asia. So it takes into account Moldova, Belarus, Azerbaijan, and other countries. It's a region that is improving this year. We saw some improvements, which is a good thing, and which is also above the global average in terms of transparency. If we look at Ukraine, we decided to look at Ukraine, a country that is in the midst of a war. We can see that significant efforts have been made to bolster governmental transparency, passing from 70 to 85%, which is really a huge increase. For instance, there's now the disclosure of current expenditures, the creation of a land cadastre portal, improvements also in the registration and communication on business ownership, and the disclosure of mining concessions. As you can see in this region, there are some countries that are above, way above others, such as Ukraine, such as Moldova, Montenegro, and some that are obviously lacking, such as Belarus, Tajikistan, and Azerbaijan. And we also have the Russian Federation that stands at 50%, so in the lower bracket, I would say. And if now we look at Asia Pacific, it's a similar situation than Europe and Central Asia in terms of the fulfillment rates. So they're just slightly above the global average. And there was no huge changes this year on Asia Pacific. We just looked at Pakistan, a country that actually decreased in transparency this year. And this is partially due to the withdrawal of Pakistan from the OGP. So it's due to a de jure decrease, which is, I must say, quite unusual. So that's the state for Asia and Pacific. And obviously, some countries are way above the lots. And it's not really surprising. We have New Zealand, of course. We have also the Korean Republic, Taiwan, and also others such as Mongolia and Indonesia. And at the bottom, Afghanistan, obviously, and others. Then if we look at Latin America is really at the global average, just slightly over it, but it's really representative. And there was some slight increase in Latin America this year. But as Alina mentioned, in some regions, we haven't seen so much changes in this year compared to the previous editions. We have Uruguay that has made improvements that are worth mentioning, I think, in financial and conflict disclosures, for instance, rules. And also, there were some advancements in judicial transparency in the disclosure of court hearing schedules. And then if we look at Sub-Saharan Africa, that's a region that I know particularly well because I was the coordinator for this region. We can see that they really remain stationary this year and are still below the global average. And I decided to make a focus on Ethiopia. Why Ethiopia? Because Ethiopia had internal conflicts, with the Tigray War in 2022 and 2023. And we have seen, since then, that there was some improvement, especially in the disclosure of public expenditures and of Supreme Court rulings, which is a good sign. And if we look globally at the ranking for Sub-Saharan Africa, it's quite unsurprising, I would say, with South Africa on the top, Uganda, then Nigeria and Kenya. But what is also interesting is that some of the unsurprising, some of the Sahelian countries, such as Chad, that, you know, have been facing some coup or have been facing some political troubles are also on the bottom of the list. And then if we look at MENA, which is the least transparent region evaluated, actually, which is really, really below the global average, because as we saw before, in terms of de facto indicators, they're quite similar to Sub-Saharan Africa, right? With a 33% fulfillment rate. But in de jure indicators, in, you know, setting things in law, the MENA region is really lacking. And we decided to make a focus on Morocco. Why? Because as Alina mentioned, the making of the T-index is really a collaborative process with public institutions that are involved as much as possible within this process. And in this case, the Instance nationale de la probité, de la prévention et de la lutte contre la corruption, which is the national, you know, agency in charge of preventing corruption in Morocco, has been highly involved in this session of the T-index, which also led to changes in and to improvements. The public procurement portal, they showed us that the public procurement portal was richer than what we've analyzed before. Also, they showed us the availability of a new land cadastre portal and of Supreme Court's hearing schedules. So this is the ranking for MENA. As for the region, it's not really surprising. We have Israel that is at the top, Jordan as well, Morocco, Kuwait, and other regions are really lagging, especially Syria, especially Iran as well, Yemen and Algeria. So that's it for the MENA region, and that's it for the presentation of the improvements in the regions from 2023 to 2024. If Alina, you want to add some words on the global trends?
Yeah, well, it is the most positive news that we see here is the fact that so many governments engage. We have opened tents of dialogues, and we really have seen progress, not just you know, corrections that governments say you misjudged us or something like this. As I told you, I have a conversation from Egypt going back 3 years now, in which every year they claim that we gave them a too bad mark for public procurement. And I said, we will improve the second when you put public procurement data up, and it's still not there. Okay, so we have dialogues, but important thing is that the dialogues come up with real progress. And we have seen significant progress. You know, in Ukraine, for instance, they had been very hit by the war, and they were really champions of transparency. Then they collapsed due to the war. And last year, they started to come back. And this is what explains why they're this year again against progress cases. Greece has made some progress. Morocco, that Noé always mentioned. Uruguay has always been on a good trend of progress. We have finally seen some progress in Bosnia. We've seen a little bit of progress in Albania, and I know they work a lot on this progress in Albania. There is more progress than regress. That is also a good news. But also there is, you know, concerning for me, because I thought that if countries once reach a benchmark, they will not step back. But this doesn't seem to happen. It seems that countries which we praised as achievers 2-3 years ago now actually experience problems. Botswana, for instance, in Africa, was a champion of fiscal transparency. They had this national development plan where they put all the money for donors or all their own money in a long framework, in a 5 years budget framework, which was an example for the rest of the world. Right? And now this is gone. Botswana is losing fiscal transparency dramatically, and we don't know what happens there. Armenia was an achiever 2 years ago, right? And 2 years ago, you know, the municipality of Yerevan used to publish all the building permits, for instance, which is one of the tools. And this year they published only 2 building permits for the entire year. Okay, so things can happen. Things can happen also in a negative sense. And this is why we have to continue to observe, and we have to rely on civil societies of these countries to report. But for the rest, there is not much, you know, bad news. And I think that the more governments engage and the more they care for reputation, the more improvement we shall see. I think it's now high time to move to the next tool, which is the tool that many people who came to this meeting are waiting for, because it's the tool For investigation, it's the tool which relies on interconnecting databases like the Register of Commerce that we only put in the T-index, but we do not interconnect it. But our colleagues do that. So Mykhailo, please.
Thank you, Alina. I will share my screen because on this screen you will see the general information, but I want to show you how this tool works on live. So a few years ago, we start to work with very interesting and mostly technical task. How we can connect a different data sets, a different register from a different country. And it's quite a challenge because in different countries you have a different misspelling names, you have a different fields. So it was an interesting task, but at the end we finally found the way. We're also using AI for this to connect at least 291 data sources in one place. And when we finish it with this simple technical task, we find out that it can be useful for such organization like a BridgeGap. It can be very useful for investigations, and especially for anti-corruption efforts. To make this database available to you, we have created this search engine, which we called Follow Money, and it is available to the BridgeGap partners. And what it really gives to you. First of all, if you're trying to follow the money, you need to change your mindset, because when you work with such data, you really need to focus your effort about two issues: about the history of the legal entity or person, and to the network. Because if you know a network with whom it's connected, and if you know the history of this entity, you will have an insight. For example, to give you a live example, there is a big operation from NSA, National Crime Agency, about how they disrupt multi-billions money laundering networks. And what is an interesting here, it's a recent case. It's published like December 4, if I remember. And this case is very interesting because I can give you an example how you can use this follows the money from the BridgeGap to see this network, because now you have only statement from the NSA. But for example, if we choose one piece of information, one small piece of information, and we switch to the follow the money search engine, we can enter this information and just click search. It already give you a results, but after you switch it to the YC Vault interface, you have all available information about this person. But it's not only like for demonstration. It's not only, we have only two pieces of information. After you expand your view, you will see some hidden networks, because this database, it's connected data across all data sets which are connected to the system. And now you're ready to expand this network. Now you can see with which entity is this person connected, who has a similar names like this person, who also is connected to this network. And after a few clicks, you will see a different names with a different nationalities, who will show you who is connected to this person. So with one piece of information, you only have this name. But with this tool, you will expand this connection, and you will see with whom it's connected currently. Where this person is director? Which information are historical, and it has a past connection to several entities? With which nationalities? Who also is connected to it? And with such kind of insights, you are really ready to make your investigation and to see something that's really hidden from your side. All this network which are connected to launder at least 700 millions pounds can be available for you just in few clicks if you know how to use it. So this follow the money search engine, it's some kind of starting point for you to see what information are available from a different data sources and with which point you can start your investigation. And with such level of access to the open data, and because it's already connected in one shared place, it's give you a really good advantage in your investigation. And I think now we are just talking about already finished operation, but if you know how to use this tool, you can start your own investigation. You can put your own piece of information in this field and found all connection, all information which are available across all these data sources. And I think you will find a lot of new names, a lot of new entities which you are not even considered that are connected to all these cases. So I think that I hope that you will find this search engine helpful for your investigation, but it's only available for the BridgeGap partners, for whom who is not a partner of BridgeGap. You can request your access separately if you think that such kind of tool are really will be helpful for your investigation. So I trying to be short because I see that we have only 10 minutes for Q&A sessions, so we can switch for question. Maybe someone has a question to us that we can expand our answer.
Okay, I answered to all the questions in the chat, but maybe people still have more questions to send, so please.
There is also a very interesting question in the Q&A. Should I read it out and maybe...
Please, Mykhailo.
Yeah. So there are many alternatives to CPI are being studied and promoted. Each appears to have its pros and cons. Are we planning to get T-index replace CPI because its findings can be more real and accurate than, for example, CPI? And is it also meant for EU, or its matrix is applicable globally? So it's an extensive question, but I think it's a relevant one. So
yeah,
maybe you want to...
Thank you very much for it. So first, CPI measures one thing: reputation of countries, how the countries are seen by the business community. It's basically the risk that these experts whose opinions are aggregated there, and who are experts generally from the business community, because CPI does not include public opinion polls, does not include the opinions of ordinary people, just of business experts. And this is the estimate of risk, how much they assess a country to be corrupt. Will they be asked for a bribe in that country or not? And this is why it is used a lot for the banks, and it's still very influential. Okay, it doesn't mean that if you look at the relationship between CPI and foreign direct investment, you are shocked to see how much foreign direct investment flows into countries which have very bad CPI scores. And they go there and they bribe. We have the shocking case of a Swedish semi-public company which goes to Uzbekistan with one of the worst CPI countries in the world, so they know what to expect. to privatize telecom. They are asked for a huge bribe. They pay the bribe. Americans step in, all right, and they are investigated under Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, caught, and they have to settle for a huge amount of money, right? So CPI is a reputation score which worked by shaming countries, but I think it works less and less, because the needs and globalization simply pushes countries to go to places which are obviously corrupt, pushes investors from Western countries. What TI index does, it's a totally different thing. First, TI index does not measure corruption. We never claim that it measures corruption. It really measures government transparency offered online. As such, it is an indicator which allows civil society to press governments to enlarge all these areas, which are ample opportunities for action for litigators for companies, litigators for civil society. I was a litigator. I sued my government hundreds of times on Freedom of Information Act in my time. I mean, and this works. This radically changed the country. We have really evidence from this from a variety of countries. This is what we do. The other index that we have, the Public Integrity Index, is better than CPI because it is an index, while already correlating with CPI, can be deconstructed in like 6 different determinants of corruption. And you can see what doesn't work. And we look at the world now, we look at the world for the past 10 years, and we see that why digitalization has improved globally. And more people have smartphones, which is good news for anti-corruption. On the other side, we see, and here I hope to answer the question of our Russian colleagues, we see that the world politically is in a far more unfavorable context, because to have a good control of corruption, you need 2 very political things: freedom of the press and judicial independence. They are both in this index of public integrity, also non-corruption risk score. And why we see digitalization going up, we see these other 2 things going down in the past 10 years. And this explains why the world is flat, why nothing much has changed. Because 20 years ago, the world was on a very positive trend, democratically wise, and now it's on democracy backsliding. So now we simply, try to survive and develop what tools we can until we will arrive to a new favorable context. On the question on EU and the rest of the world, T-index exists and will continue to exist for the entire world, 143 countries. In BridgeGap, we only decided to cover EU member states and EU accession countries and EU associated countries like Norway, Switzerland. Okay, the reason we took this decision is that we have all this legislation in depth that we are going to put in these databases. I mean, the data is going to become far more granular, and we cannot do this for the rest of the world because the data is not available. Let alone that we would probably need 60 million euros, not 6 million euros, but we would still attempt to do it if the data would exist. So we will cover in depth, but only 43, not 143 countries.
Thank you. You mentioned the question from our Russian colleagues. I think that's an interesting one. Do you want to dive further into that one? It was a question from Alina Vandesheva. Mostly it's about information openness, but taking into account the experience of Russia, we can easily see that there is a direct causal link between the level of information openness and the level of corruption, especially if we categorize grant corruption. This is the question you meant?
Yeah, I think I answered this question. I mean, you see,
Okay.
corruption, you cannot, by solving corruption, you cannot solve political violence problems. In corruption theory, we basically say that after a period in which a historical period, when things are solved by pure violence, let's say that thieves stopped you and take your wallet, once of the sudden you become to make the thieves tax collectors and say, okay, stop killing people. We're going to give you this money from our wallet voluntarily. And this is what the Nobel Prize laureate Douglas North, calls that corruption is like an intermediary stage coming from this pure theft, violent state of nature. Russia has not come into the state in which political violence was handled. I think this Russian civil society was heroic, and I think that in transparency, Russia is still doing amazingly well for a country which is so autocratic as it is. But there are, power issues to be handled. It's not corruption in Russia driving violence and autocracy. It is the other way around. It is the power monopoly of the Sistema which supports the state capture.
Thank you. And then there's another nice question in the Q&A from Eduardo Alencar. How does the T-index differ from the International Transparency Index and the World Bank's Control of Corruption Indicator? Are there initiatives that consolidate international data on arrests related to corruption crimes like white-collar crimes? Who wants to take this one?
Well, I think it still should be me. So first, there is no connection between T-index and the database mentioned. The World Bank things are aggregates which are similar to corruption perception index, but on top of this, they integrate, which I think is a positive thing, they integrate public opinion surveys. But now people who work with statistical aggregates should understand that statistical aggregates are very problematic for tracing a trend across time. Because if you put 50 things into a basket, simply the act of extracting one thing out of them will create a lot of statistical noise. And if you look at this World Bank estimates, you see that the world really has not changed. But if we use like determinants of corruption, we manage to capture some change. Okay, so it's not good. All change falls within the statistical error. We don't like aggregates because aggregates have a time lag, and this time lag prevents us from seizing changes in corruption. It's true corruption doesn't change very much, but it changes more than its lagging indicators. World Bank has made a similar attempt to T-index, but only once and in the past, which shows the danger to such index, which is sustainability. Indexes like this cost money. It's a big effort to do this. So even the mighty World Bank have done this only once. It's a paper by Hollier and al., and it's really a great paper. What did they do is that they used as proxy the degree to which countries answer statistical questionnaires that the World Bank sends. World Banks ask countries certain economic data, and countries send back questionnaires filled to a certain extent. And you can definitely turn this into a measurement from countries which give you 100% answers and competent answers to countries who send the questionnaire nearly empty. And that is the only other transparency index which exists prior to ours. And it existed only once for this paper, which is a shame because I think it was a good thing. Now UNODC is doing something quite revolutionary. And I have been chairing this measurement effort from an expert group, but it was consulted with 180 countries and now officially adopted. So now UN has something called United Nations Statistical Framework to Measure Corruption, in which we basically asked 180 statistical offices around the world, which pledged to collect objective data on corruption, not perceptions. Now, I put there quite a lot of indicators, about 50, 60, I don't remember, and I created a framework. But in the consultation with the countries, it grew to really like 200 indicators. So it grew into a very cumbersome instrument. We are now piloting this instrument because for sure a shorter number of indicators are more relevant, are more cost effective, and we hope that they will become the next CPI, an instrument that statistical offices document themselves and which are based on facts and not on perceptions. But we have just started this, so please encourage, if you are from any country here, and by the way, I want to thank anybody from the governments who cooperated in T-index. If you joined us today, many thanks, and please stay with us in the future and encourage others to do so. You will see immediate improvement in your rankings if you cooperate. Please cooperate with this UNODC exercise, and please give us feedback. Tell us these are really bad indicators or cost too much and we cannot. We are going to improve on it until we arrive at something that everybody can use.
Thank you. And on that note, and that invitation to collaborate with us, I would like to close this webinar. We are at 3 o'clock. We've promised to close on time. I want to thank all the excellent panelists, Professor Mungiu-Pippidi from the Rice University, Principal Investigator of the BridgeGap project, Noël Letourneux from ERCAS, Mykhailo Koltsov from YouControl. Thank you, everyone, for your excellent presentations and your answers to the questions posed in the chat. And please visit us at thecorruptiondata.eu and join the BridgeGap community. And thank you, Benjamin Schmidt, as well. Thank you so much for joining us from SAIPI at 8 o'clock in the morning from the other side of the world. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Stay in touch with us. We will be back with more free tools for you.